Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for potentially listening to me. I'm going to talk a lot about the future of advertising. I feel like the future of advertising. I'm going to talk about it quite briefly and quite vaguely. You're all in suspiciously comfortable seats. So this is kind of edited highlights of some things to watch out for. And in particular, this idea of post-digital. Like, post-digital is the era of the internet where we make sense of it, because we're not there yet. Like, the current internet experience is quite crappy. Like, we think about technology a lot, and the reason why we think about it a lot is because often it doesn't work. So we are going to enter this incredible environment where we construct new business models, construct new forms of advertising, construct things that are more empathetic and deal with abundance, but we're not quite there yet. And I call this period the mid-digital age. Like, we talk a lot about the Internet of Things. I actually think we're realistically in the interim of things before we get there. And you see it a lot. Like, this is a screen in my local library in the UK, and you can see hundreds of the kind of fingerprints and the sweat marks of disappointment, where hundreds of small children have come up to this screen and then quite quickly realized it doesn't work like that. I don't know if you remember those things called label makers, where you could type out really neat labels, but there are a surprisingly large number of these labels being made saying, this is not a touchscreen, because you have to manage people's expectations. Like, technology is making incredible things possible. The rate of change is incredible, but the only thing that grows faster than what is possible are our expectations of it. So we routinely suffer from this experience gap between what we know could be done and what we actually tend to experience. In this interim, things are also incredibly complicated. If you ever want to show how complicated things are, you just show lots of logos on a chart. If you want to try and find your own company in that, then good luck. But in this period of peak complexity, we need a lot of guidance, and we need a lot of help. And that's what I'm going to talk about a bit today. So I'm going to introduce myself and my role a little bit more. I'm going to talk in more depth about this idea of the mid-digital age, and then more helpfully, I'm going to give us 3 ways to think about advertising for the future. Hopefully that sounds good. I am here to be irritating. There are a lot of people that go on a lot of stages, and they say things which are absolute crap. Like, you say things like, people want conversations with brands. That's absolute nonsense. You say things like TV is dead. That's not true at all. It just feels a bit different. My favorite is the expression that millennials are hard to reach. Like, millennials, they're surgically attached to their phones. Like, there's never been an easier group of people to reach. Like, people plotting government downfalls that live in the woods in Kansas, those people are hard to reach. Like, millennials, there's never been a fucking easier generation of people to reach. So I like to just sort of be a bit annoying, really. So if you sit there and you're thinking, oh, who's this guy? This is really frustrating. It means I'm doing my job really well. Lots and lots of things are changing. We've got 3D printing. Anyone here 3D printed anything recently? Got cryptocurrencies, people buying things with Bitcoin or Ethereum. We've got robots. We've got AI. I'd like to announce formally this is the last presentation I'm doing myself. At this point onwards, it's all going to be written by Marcel. So this is a sad day for me. That was a joke. That's not for tweeting out. That's not for the people at Publicis to hear about. A bit scared now. We've got drones. Anyone had anything delivered by a drone recently? Not many of you. We've got vending machines that do likes. If you go to Russia and you feel like you've got no friends, you can buy shares and likes on your Facebook posts. We got trainers that you can order pizza from. I'm a big fan of this. You get a bit hungry. Job done. But I kind of joke because we need to be aware of all these changes, but we also need to be aware of the meaning of these changes and how significant they really are. Like, I think as an industry, everything that's new, we tend to get very excited by. We tend to kind of form creative briefs around them or set up new agencies to deal with them. And often these things are not particularly meaningful. Like, often the kind of next Facebook killer actually becomes something that you can barely remember a few months on. Things like Pokemon Go. You would have been fairly unwise to set up an agency around the potential of Pokemon Go. So we need to sort of find a contrast between these two things. Like if you think about your day this morning, it probably wasn't radically different to about 5 years ago. Like we see that slide a lot with all of these companies weren't around in 2003. And that's completely true. But if you think about new changes in your life in the last 5 years, if you think about new apps that you've downloaded, which has led to you materially living a different life in the last 5 years, there's actually not that much change. So a lot of my job is about understanding what's different, but also what is the same. And it's about having a much more kind of meaningful and profound and thoughtful conversation with our clients about this stuff. Because I think we've entered quite a reactionary environment where unless we have a chatbot and we've done a VR experience and we have a snap spectacle strategy, we feel vulnerable. And often it's much more about being empathetic to people, their changing needs, their changing expectations, and working around that rather than latest technology. I wrote a book about this. I'm not here to promote the book because you feel very vulnerable if you write a book. It's got 25 reviews now. 24 of them are 5-star, and one of them is a 1-star review. So this is like Russian roulette for your attention span. So the mid-digital age. So we are in the mid-digital age, and it's easy to understand it by putting it in context. So we had the pre-digital age, and I actually walked amongst you before, and you are surprisingly young. You are younger than most people I speak to, and you might not remember clearly this age. But this is an age where things tended to do one thing extremely well. You would have like a radio cassette player, you'd have a Walkman, you'd have a DVD player, you'd have a TV, you'd have a magazine, you'd go to the movies. Everything was designed to do one particular task extraordinarily well. There was no complexity to it. You wouldn't start reading a magazine and kind of forget what it was. You wouldn't turn on a light switch and realize it didn't work because the Wi-Fi was down. You wouldn't start watching a TV show and it crashed because it needed a firmware update. Things worked incredibly well. We will probably live at some point in the post-digital age where everything magically works, where somehow the ads that we're targeted with will feel quite personalized without freaking us out. We'll watch some shows on some devices and we'll seamlessly pick them up on others. Our data will be kept securely. We'll be able to pay for things with our faces. It will be this amazing futuristic world. Like doors will make that sound like they do in movies, like whoo, as you enter a room. We're going to wear silver. There's going to be hoverboards everywhere. It's going to be amazing. But we're not there yet. We're in this age where we've kind of taken what we knew before and we've pulled it through a kind of new digital lens almost, or a digital frame. So the image on the left-hand side is e-commerce done in about 1890. It was just called catalog commerce there. But we've effectively pulled through the same protocols and the same UI and the same consumer journey, but just through to the internet. We've got things like TV ads. Like I was there in about 2003 where I saw TV ads on my first media plan, and I worked for a creative agency. And we took the TV ad and we rendered it out with a different codec, and we kind of hoped that that was okay. And it turns out that for about 15 years, that has been okay. You can just take a TV ad, stick it on YouTube, and feel quite proud of the fact that you've understood the power of digital. We've done the same thing with print ads, really. Take a beautiful image-based ad like the one on the left from about 1790, stick it on Instagram, and take a bow, because you get digital, you get social, you get new social platforms. Like now, you can add a shoppable link to it, and you can be incredibly futuristic. Content marketing, the Ridge and Furrow in 1879, the Michelin Guide in 1900, or Land Rover stories from this year. I'm not saying these are terrible tactics or they don't work. I'm just saying we congratulate ourselves a lot on taking things that have been done for centuries before, making minimal changes, and feeling like we understand the modern world. And my favorite is influencer marketing. I mean, basically, it's just attractive people holding things up in slightly strange ways. I really like the one of the trainers, just like that. Like, I wonder what brief led to that. Just make sure you can see the trainers. I just think we can do more. So I'm not really a miserable person. I don't go around being critical. I just think we need to get a lot more excited about what the technology means. We need to stop sticking things on our heads and claiming it looks cool or it's good enough. For me, the mid-digital age is where we take things from the past and we apply the minimum level of technology and the minimum level of modernity in a hope of getting some kind of press or hoping to sort of get away and feel safe in our jobs. The post-digital age is where we look at the toolkit that technology allows us, we look at the behaviors and the expectations that this creates within audiences, and we make things from scratch. We make brand new experiences, brand new advertising forms that have never been known before. And that is an incredibly exciting brief to work on. And that's a brief that we all have at the moment in our careers. So this is actually probably the best time to work in advertising. Here are 3 ways to think about it. So there's going to be 3 different chapters to help contextualize the way that we think about the future. The first one, I think, is to understand people. Like, what's most interesting about technology is what it means in the way that we behave rather than the technology itself. Like, we talk a lot about the digital world, and I don't think the digital world really exists anymore. Like, my dad is about 75. He lives in the countryside in the Cotswolds. If I ask him how much time he spends on the internet, he says about 4 hours per day, which is quite expected for someone in the countryside. If I ask my sister, and she's 43, how much time she spends online, she says about 6 hours per day, which again is to be expected. If I ask my niece how much time she spends online, and she's 14, she says what? Because you have to kind of explain to her what the internet is, and like when it starts and when it stops. And it doesn't make any sense to her. And it's not that she's stupid, it's because it has no relevance. It would be like asking us how much time we spend with electricity per day. Like, it's not that we don't understand what electricity is, it's just, well, we don't really think of it like that. Like, we all grew up, even though you are surprisingly young, some of you, some of us grew up in an era where if you wanted to go to the internet, you'd have to sort of wait for your flatmate or your sister to get off the phone. And that would take ages in my house. Then you'd have to sort of unplug something, plug something else in, open some special connection software, hope that you had enough minutes left that month. You'd get the sort of scratchy music that took you to the internet. You did what you had to do on the internet, and then you'd get off the internet before someone complained. And then later on that day, you'd remembered that you'd forgotten to do something, and you have to go all the way back online. Like, online is a sort of verb and a kind of feeling and a behavior that doesn't exist in the modern world, and I don't think anyone has understood this yet. I've been doing this kind of presentation for about 7 years, and it still has not hit people that there is no such thing as online dating. It is just dating in 2018. There is no such thing as mobile banking. It's just how you do banking if you're not an idiot. Like, you do not need to have like a global head of digital any more than you need to have a global head of electricity or a global head of oxygen. Like, the technology can be deeply profound, incredibly exciting, absolutely essential for us to understand, but also not something we have to completely segment and put in a different building. So there is no digital world. This is not some weird photograph that I found. This is just how things look. Like, in the last 8 days, I've been in about 9 different cities around the world, including like the shittiest parts of India. And this is just what it looks like. You can go through favelas in Brazil, and there are no longer satellite dishes on people's houses. There are small children with no money staring into a smartphone. I think we really need to think about this. Digital will probably be the pipe for essentially all media. Like, newspapers are not going to completely die. Like, there will always be printed 6 sheets outside supermarkets, and they will be great places to advertise. But generally speaking, in the same way that everything is powered by electricity today, we will enter an environment where all media is supplied digitally. So all of these arguments about TV versus digital, they make no sense in that context. We're going to have screens that proliferate everywhere, whether they're cars that we drive, whether they're self-driving cars, whether they're kind of bathroom mirrors, whether it's digital outdoor. Like, we do just need to accept that the ambient world will become one where the internet supplants everything that we ever experience, where most surfaces become shoppable, where most surfaces will track how you're behaving. We're also going to see much more intimate devices. Like, generally speaking, technology is getting smaller. It's getting closer to our skin. It's becoming things that we hold up more closely. It's becoming more tactile. It's becoming more intimate. It's also becoming more pervasive. So the fact that so many of us are quite happy to plug things into our homes that listen to us is quite an interesting threshold in the way that we think about technology. And that means we're going to get more personal data. Like, I am not the first person to tell you this stuff, but we really need to think about the kind of data that we can realistically capture. Like, we will have the ability to know where people are, but also where they're planning on going. We'll know about their stress levels. We'll know about their shopping behavior. We'll know the contents of their fridge. We'll know their bank account behavior. The ability to keep all of this data centrally and do amazing things with it, we cannot begin to underestimate. How we do so in a way that is respectful of people and that people trust and that we're transparent about is probably the biggest conversation we haven't really had in this industry. We tend to take as much data, do fairly stupid things with it, and then hope that people don't notice. If instead we focus on the value that we can give in exchange for this data and tell people why we want this data, then I think amazing things can happen. What we'll probably see is advertising experience which kind of blend around us a lot more. We tend to do very channel-centric planning, where we think about the technology that we use to reach people, rather than a much more empathetic and creative approach where we kind of envelop people with advertising experiences which help people. Like, how do you go from brands to performance campaigns in ways that feel quite seamless? For this, we probably need a new structure. We're in this environment where lines are blurring and we haven't noticed. Like, we think that these two people are watching TV, because that's what watching TV looks like. It's a big screen, it's a big room, they're far back from it. We're not entirely sure if that's TV, but it's something a bit like that. And we're really confused by what this is. We have no idea. Is this a mobile buy? Is this a social buy? Is this a digital buy? Is this an influencer buy? We're not sure. All of the lines that we've comfortably used to segment things don't make sense anymore. Like, when does TV become video? Like, how long and how well produced does a TV show have to become before it's a movie? Like, how does a 360 video suddenly become called VR? Like, all of these things we use don't make that much sense. In fact, we're seeing devices become much more similar. Essentially, all devices are black mirrors. That's where the name of the show came from. They're all connected to the internet. They're all massive screens. They can all play video. Most of them can do sound. Some of them are in your car. Some of them are in your house. Some of them are on your wrist. Effectively, things become identical. The only thing that's really different between them are the contexts for consumption. So this idea of planning advertising and targeting advertising based more on context, I think, will be interesting. And we've structured ourselves incredibly badly for this. Pretty much every time a new technology comes along, we find a group of people that we're normally slightly less comfortable around, put them in a new department in a new building, let them wear more casual clothes, and give them like a neon sign, and that's how we build advertising agencies. First, it was interactive in about 2001, then it was mobile, then it was social. And every time a new thing comes along, we kind of build an agency around it because it's easiest to sell it that way. It's easy to sell a social campaign. And it kind of carries on in ways that doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm pretty sure today you could set up a Snap agency or a VR agency or a chatbot agency. You could set up a voice agency. This is completely the wrong way to think about advertising. We need to be much more focused on people and their behaviors and the opportunities we have to connect with them. So this entire kind of blur of advertising, this entire kind of messy construct we have of lots of different specialisms kept apart from each other, I don't know how to do it, but we need to find a way to remove all of those lines and to act as one and to be aware of technology, be aware of the importance of data, be aware of what creativity makes possible, but more than anything else, be empathetic. So the last chapter here, it involves us rethinking everything. Like, as an industry, we pride ourselves on creativity, we pride ourselves on innovation, but we actually haven't really made anything new in about the last 50 or 60 years. We can still take a TV ad, turn it into a 6-second video and think that we've created something new. And I think we need to be bolder than that. Like, Steve Jobs was able to make the iPhone not despite the fact he had no experience of smartphones, but because he had no experience of iPhones. Elon Musk was able to make a Tesla despite the fact that lots of people told him it was impossible. Like, he knew that he had to think about things in different ways, be much more bold, be much more naive. And because of the power of that dream and a lack of muscle memory about what is possible, he was able to create what many people thought was impossible. I think the greatest threat to any incumbent is actually not about knowing too little. It's about knowing too much in the modern way of doing things. It's about being limited by assumptions that we've made that don't necessarily exist. So I think we need to get a bit more creative and a bit bolder and take more risks. And just think things like, what would marketing look like if you'd never known marketing? Like, it's actually quite nice to talk to like an 8-year-old child and just explain what you're doing, because quite often there are so many whys that it makes you realize that actually they're probably better at their job than you are, because they don't know what shouldn't be done. So what would marketing look like if we'd never known it before? What ads would we create if we'd no knowledge and no memory and no clear idea of what ads should look like? Imagine if we didn't assume the same KPIs, if we didn't assume that things should be made in the same spreadsheets that we currently use. Like, what assumptions do we hold that are actually not necessarily true? There are lots and lots of things that keep us from making huge leaps because we assume that people won't do them, or they won't buy them, or it's not possible. And what new tools can we work around? So as rude as I am about VR or AR or Bitcoin or other forms of advertising that feel quite indulgent, what is there out there that is incredibly profound and incredibly exciting that we can use to form these new advertising experiences? Because I think there's an amazing relationship between technology and progress and the power to do something that you feel incredibly proud by. If you were a structural engineer at the time when steel was invented, you could make skyscrapers that had never been made before. If you were an artist at the time when the metal paint tube was created, you could suddenly go outside and create anything, and the world of impressionism existed. We are at that same moment in advertising. Like, the internet is probably the best thing that's ever happened to all of us. So I think if we just think much more proactively, much more profoundly, and much more excitedly about it, it's probably the best time ever to work in this industry. Thank you very much.